声浮现。我自潜出云端，气息拂面，不期然而然的初见。你在唱着谁的心愿？愿当人不动听得见。你从眼若神风上起天，好似今宵上线。
Damn,
Ugly.
you're
Ugly.
Oh my god.
Disgusting.
Don't look
I'm
at
gonna
me.
kill you.
Meanwhile,
What is that? What the fuck is that?
Use fire prevention. Oh fuck, really?
Auf der Weide blüht ein kleines Blümelein. Und das heißt Erika.
Lushun, if you move, sightseeing tour, I gonna report you, passive plus AFK.
Wake the fuck up, samurai. We have a city to burn.
Last warning, last warning, last warning.
是我生来多情者，脚踝抱来感受挫折。情深一往是真。就光临我的温柔乡，纵容所有不堪的窒息和妄想，也还手掌儿，我也会守望，有不息的爱抚染某个心脏。人生是会指引着可惜迷惘，而这心多不用苍苍，只为去失望。别让我执掌。我不写好求知此刻，偏离连群下起落寞。
Bro, listen. I want to gather all Jaeger players in a fucking camp.
就关于我的温柔乡，做了所有不堪的窒息和我想，也可以收场。
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine. They're not really fine. You just can't get into it because they would.
人生是海之一角，何须迷茫？把这心多多有苍苍，只为追失望，别让我软泪之掌。
Und guck mich an, ich muss niemand was erzählen. Die Narben auf meinem Körper haben gesagt, ich wurde hier.
看我你是火狼悲伤，值得嘉奖，当年的虚荣与虚妄，你不需原谅。我可以不是冷雨，治你那一块钱的丑恶大罪状。江面之下的夕阳，自知荒唐，可我有该和去和往，爱去是否想不过，那去曙光。
I've decided to try my hand at this review sort of thing. I'm gonna go over Lushun a little bit. Overall, I mean, I really like this ship. I would give it about 7.8 out of 10. Not really an 8 out of 10, like incredibly good DD, but it's definitely at least a 7.5. Personally, I really like this ship. I am a huge Grozavoy enjoyer, so even though this ship isn't exactly Grozavoy, I do really like playing it. And just a bit of a disclaimer, since it's the first time I'm doing this, I think this is kind of self-explanatory, but you know, don't take my opinion as everything. This community is a bit of an echo chamber, and I don't really want to contribute to that, so gonna kind of go over this ship and talk a bit about it, but by no means should you take my opinion as the truth. Just play the ship, make your own opinion on it. You know, you might really like it, you might hate it. Personally, I think it's a very good ship though. So, yeah. I'm gonna go over just generally the cons and the pros about the ship before I kind of go into more specifications about it. I'll start with the cons because, you know, I want to get the bad out of the way first. I think most people who have played the ship would agree one of the biggest drawbacks to this ship is it's very slow, and this is kind of exacerbated by the fact that it has no engine boost, which is a pretty big problem, right? And Lushun's low speed really comes to bite its ass in a couple of ways. Like, first off, you know, it's pretty obvious if you have low speed, it's harder to dodge, you know, it's harder to rotate flanks. So for example, if your team is losing on the other side, if you are playing a Killer Bear or a Marceau, you can get there very fast to try to plug the gap or try to stop your team from losing. But with Lushun, it's kind of like it's kind of the same as daring. Like, I call this the daring problem, right? You can only really go 37 knots, and you're not really going to be able to rotate to another flank fast enough. And this kind of means that Lushun stays on a flank, and you have to win that flank before you kind of rotate to like another side. And this makes it a bit less like modular, I'd say, in terms of like strategy. And it's also kind of a problem because with Lushun you don't have smoke, so of course you're going to be open water gunboating all the time. And even though, you know, like ships like Venezia, like Legmod, Moskva, stuff like that, they've always been kind of like a nuisance to destroyers, but with stuff like, you know, Grozavoy, you can at least smoke if you really have to farm Venezia. With Kaba, you know, in sometimes you can just like, if they're distracted, you can kind of use your speed, juke a little bit and open water, finish it off. But Lushun can't really do that. It's low speed, it has no smoke, there's no engine boost, so when you have something like Venezia and Lake Mod Moskva on your flank, it's kind of joke, right? If that guy is like really competent, he can wipe you off the map, and you're basically relegated to like a torpedo.dd role, which is kind of annoying. But regardless of that, like, I think that's like one of the biggest problems with Lushun, is that it's kind of like not very modular in that sense, where if you have that, for example, if you have that Venezia on your flank, you're also stuck on that flank because you can't really rotate fast enough. So that's kind of one of the biggest problems Lushun suffers above like other ships. But other than that, other big con would be it has a gimped version of the Grozavoy shell, so it has much lower HE and AP alpha, and it's pretty bad. I think Haruguma, like the Japanese 100mm, is the only shell that actually has worse damage than Lushun. I think Daring has even like, I think Daring does like 1600 alpha. That's like even worse than Daring. And even though this is kind of supplemented by the fact that you just fire so fast, it does pose a very big problem against when you're, for example, trading against destroyers that either just burst you down very quickly or can disappear very fast. So for example, because you're going to need to constantly shoot at a DD to basically kill it, like you rely on DPM rather than alpha damage, if a Regolo just instant your face, you know, slams you for like 8k in one salvo and then just like, you know, disappears in smoke, like good luck, man, you're kind of screwed, right? So that's one of the pretty big problem. Like if you're spamming a battleship, it doesn't really matter. Saturation does make the lower alpha damage a bit worse, but I mean, it's mainly within DD trades. If the DD is like a Kleber or like a Regolo or something like that, you're gonna start feeling that the HE alpha or like even the AP alpha in some cases is gonna start kicking you on the ass. So yeah, I mean, other than that, I think another con I would say is that the fact that it has a deep water torp is kind of annoying, because when you're contesting a cap, it makes it so that you can't really torpy other DD, but if the other DD is RPF, they're going to be RPF torping you. So that's the problem that's suffered by a lot of Pan-Asian DDs, but it is a problem regardless. I don't think Lushun's torpedoes are bad, but they do suffer in that regard sometimes, especially if you're contesting against a DD, which you can't just shoot without losing a lot of HP, so you're both kind of locked in a stalemate. None of you want to shoot, and maybe, for example, it's a Smartland, and he torps you for free, and you can't really do anything against him, right? So, bit of a problem there, but it's not a huge deal. But other than that, that's all for cons, I'd say. I'll talk a bit about the pros. Personally, you know, the first pro is like really obvious, the fact it has huge DPM. I think that if you build it for BFT and Fearless Brawler with MBM3 and Cell 6, it gets around 262k HE DPM, which is pretty impressive considering its HE DPM is like basically dog shit. And this is like really good because I'm going to talk a lot about this later, because I really love the 130mm gun, but I think it's incredible that you have such great DPM with such a great ballistic gun. Even though the HE and AP alpha is like gutted through the floor, you still get the ballistic and the shell travel time of the Grozavoy shell, which is incredible. The other thing is kind of related, but I think that Lushun basically has the best concealment relative to its DPM of any DD in this game. 5.8 concealment is huge, because if you compare this to Grozavoy, right, because I'm going to talk about Grozavoy a bit in this video. The thing with Grozavoy is that you have 6 km conceal, which is not bad, but at 6 kilometers you're going to be competing with a lot of relatively good DPM DDs like Daring, I mean even Hayate, like maybe DDs that can do a number on you like a Z52. You're going to be competing with a lot of those DDs at a 6 kilometer mark of Grozavoy's concealment. But having 5.8 kilometer concealment means basically anything with the same concealment as you or lower can't outgun you, right? And it's such a huge deal that, for example, a Daring, if you're like, for example, in a reversing position in a cap, something like a Daring or like a Hayate basically can't into you for free. You have a 200 meter basically window where you can basically keep reversing, get the first shot, or like, you know, keep kiting them so you can keep them in concealment. That 200 meter difference between 6 kilometers and 5.8 is a huge deal. If Lushun had 6 kilometer concealment, I'd still play it. It would still be a very good DD, but the fact it has 5.8 is huge, because it's basically, it has the best DPM of like any DD relative to its concealment, in my opinion. So the other pro that I would say I was talking about is like kind of like relevant to its heal. The fact that Lushun, if you can play Lushun pretty carefully, it has an incredible amount of HP. I don't know exactly how much potential HP it has. Like its hit pool already is like not bad, 24.5k, and also the fact that the ship itself, it's not big, right? And I'll talk a bit about this later. That's really basically that's it for like the cons and pros of Lushun. Now I'm gonna start going into like more specific kind of elements of the ship. So after we've finished talking about the guns, I really just do want to bring up a point of really just what range you should be playing Lushun at. Whether this is, you know, stock range, your range is like 15 kilometers with AFT, basically one range mod, either the module or AFT skill, or you should be playing at max range. Now you guys probably know the answer already. You should be playing with one range because you really want that 15 kilometers to keep your destroyer safe. It's not like, you know, a very hard question. You don't play too far, but you don't play too close, because your ship's rather vulnerable to getting shot at because you're rather slow. But I did want to talk a little bit about what range you should be playing Lushun at, because I tend to get a lot of questions and people asking me stuff like, why do you hate people who play range on Regola so much? Or why do you play Plymouth like you have a Death Wish, right? And I kind of want to talk a little bit about what this concept, I think that's kind of relevant to the ship, called HE trapping. I don't see a lot of people that are too aware of it, but it's something that influences how well you can do on a ship, and also how you can really more efficiently farm the ship in order to confirm kills and therefore win more games, right? So to kind of preface this concept, I'm going to bring up a bit of a question. The question is very simple. It's just, why do people push, right? Usually there are three main reasons why people will push. The first one is because they're stupid. Kind of self-explanatory, you know, it's a new player, they saw maybe a Panzernaka video where a GK got 700 secondary hits, it's like, oh, I must push, right? It's very simple, and chances are, if you're above the average skill bracket, or you are of the average skill bracket, you will be farming these people. It's a very self-explanatory first reason. The second reason is a lot more influential and significant, is that people will push to win. When our game's outcome will depend on, for example, capturing an area, killing a ship, or forcing a ship out of an area, the ship that is pushing will be willing to put themselves at a disadvantage in order to win the game. So that's basically the second reason. The third reason is what we're really going to be kind of analyzing here, and this is very important because this is more of a psychological than more so a strategic or tactical reason. Third reason people really push is because they think that their death is inevitable. So when a ship thinks that, you know, they can't escape a situation, a lot of people, they will choose instead to keep on pushing. It's kind of a bit like a sunk cost fallacy where, you know, you feel like you can't get out, so you basically do as much as you can. Maybe they'll push for a trade, maybe they'll try to do as much damage as they can before they die. And this is kind of important because this is what we're really going to be talking about with concept, which I call HE trapping, because it's a psychological factor that you can manipulate. It's not like every player is going to fall for this, but there's going to be a lot of players, especially when you play random battles, that will kind of fall for this trick. So I'm going to put up a graph on the screen. Let's, for the basis of this example, let's just say you're playing like a Hindenburg. Hindenburg stock has about 18 kilometers of range. Let's just say, for example, the Hindenburg is running range 1. I personally wouldn't run it, but for the sake of this example, let's play the devil's advocate. So now your Hindenburg has 20.7 kilometers of range. Let's just say a Yamato begins pushing into Hindenburg's 20 kilometer sort of gun range zone, the zone in which Hindenburg can hit the Yamato from its gun range, and let's just say, you know, the Hindenburg starts firing immediately as soon as a Yamato goes into range. This is what a lot of players do, right? As soon as the Yamato starts taking fire from the Hindenburg, as long as they're not really stupid, they're not going to put themselves at a disadvantage. They're just going to kite out, and they're going to exit your damage zone, and essentially what you have done is maybe you've done at most like 20k to that Yamato. That Yamato gets away, you know, maybe he repositions to a place where he is outside of your gun range, or he breaks vision, or he can't be hit, right? But essentially the point is that the Yamato has kited out of this gun range zone, and he just heals back, he DCPs, and when he comes back, you're going to be dealing with basically a full HP Yamato again. So that's not really how you should effectively farm, because this isn't very efficient, especially because a lot of spammers like Lushun deal HE damage, which is the highest percentage of damage that can be healed through a typical repair party. So let's just now say, for example, Hindenburg is still running range mod. However, that the Yamato has gone into Hindenburg's gun range zone, but the Hindenburg chooses to hold fire until it reaches 18 kilometers. Now, we know that Hindenburg's 18 kilometers is its stock gun range, so right off the bat, the Yamato can't really know if the Hindenburg's running range mod or not. An attentive player might just figure it out by the time between its gun reloads, but it's not going to be immediately apparent. And now, the Yamato is kind of like they don't know. But if the Yamato turns to kite, now that the Yamato has basically 2.5 kilometers more range to cover before it can get out safely from the Hindenburg's gun range. That's not what happens all the time, right? The Yamato is not going to be full HP all the time. So, for example, the Yamato might be on fire, stacking 2 fires, maybe at half HP, because battle situations aren't necessarily perfect. Maybe the Hindenburg's also a bit low. So in this case, the Yamato could be already damaged, and tensions are mounting higher for the Yamato. When it starts pushing in, it's going to feel a lot more pressure when the Hinden starts farming it. And this can be exacerbated even further. For example, if the Hindenburg is running gun mod and it chooses to open fire at 15 kilometers instead. It basically only reveals itself to Yamato when the Yamato is in a more critical zone where it cannot escape. And when the Yamato starts taking fire where it can't escape, it kind of like flicks, right? They know that I'm probably gonna die before I finish kiting out of this Hindenburg's gun range, so I'm going to try keep on pushing, try to keep on going forward to maybe take a trade or just deal as much damage as I can. As I said before, it is a bit of a sunk cost fallacy, and that's what you're really trying to manipulate. It's kind of just the same idea that, Lushun has 15 kilometers of gun range, but you don't really have to use all of it all the time, just because your ship is a bit fragile, just because it's a bit slow and is very susceptible to taking damage. You shouldn't be trying to farm at max range all the time, and in fact, I would also hold my fire in a lot of situations for the BB to get a bit closer, maybe under 13 kilometers, so then they find it a lot harder to escape from the HE trap, essentially. And this kind of concept is exacerbated by the simple fact that, frankly, as a general rule, for nearly all ships, the closer you are to a target, the more damage you will deal, and there's a couple of reasons for this. For example, there's less dispersion, your shell travels, has less time to travel to the target, and also your ballistic may determine that a closer ship is way easier to hit. So for example, if you're playing DM, Colbert, ships like that. This is actually one of the reasons why kiting is such an effective tactic for new players, and well, all players really, because you're forcing your opponent in a situation where you will always shoot them at a closer distance than they will shoot you. So it's this idea of HE trapping that is rather relevant to Lushun and also other ships. It's just that you want to play closer because you deal more damage, and because you deal more damage, you can kill targets faster. Why would you deal 120k to a Yamato at max range when you can push in closer, make it so the Yamato doesn't have a suitable escape path, and just kill it with 80k damage, right? Very simple proposition on paper, but a lot of players tend to play it safe, and I can tell that a lot of players are going to play Lushun very safe, because after a couple of battles they realize it's not very fast, takes damage, and its heal is probably not as great as they expected. But regardless of that, you want to be playing Lushun a bit closer to the action zone. You don't want to be opening fire immediately at max range, and you don't want to be playing at the back all the time, even if your ship maneuvers like a brick, right? Because you don't want to be doing 140k damage to a Conqueror and then wondering why you lose. So yeah, that's just the concept of Heishi trapping, very relevant to Lushun. I wanted to cover a bit. So next thing I want to talk about is Lushun's gun, and this is going to be a very similar gun found on Grozavoy with identical ballistic and also flight characteristics. The only difference, of course, is Lushun's nerf shell, but regardless of this, it can still take on a lot of the advantages of the 130mm gun. And the real advantage of this gun over its contemporaries is its ballistic and travel time, which allow it to, in the case of Grozavoy, have less DPM, but still be able to outtrade against other destroyers with poorer ballistics, such as, for example, Gearing, Smarland, Marceau, these sorts of destroyers, solely on the fact that when you cross around the 8 to 9 kilometer mark, you're going to be hitting a lot more shells on target than your opponent. So your DPM is of course irrelevant if you don't even hit your target, and this is something that the 130mm gun really abuses. Now with Lushun, Lushun has both the DPM as well as the ballistic and flight characteristics of the 130mm gun found on Grozavoy. And that's one of the reasons why I think Lushun's gun is so powerful, in that not only do you have solid DPM, basically in the realm of the area Heishi, but you also have a ballistic, which gives you an advantage when you're trading against destroyers with a poorer ballistic than your own. And in a sense, this allows it to trade far better than what its pure DPM number will suggest. Because of course, Lushun has good DPM, but it's not the best. Having its ballistic and being able to abuse your concealment, control the engagement, and start engagements with enemy destroyers at further distances where you will have a more marked advantage with your ballistic is going to be imperative in DD trading. Now, it is a little bit different from Grozavoy, and this is one of the disadvantages of the gun that I think is kind of prevalent once you start playing the ship a lot, is that because Lushun fires so fast, you're going to be holding down your left mouse button, and it's going to be a lot harder for newer players especially to track a target, especially a nimble destroyer, while you are trying to constantly fire your gun. It's not like Grozavoy, for example, where if you're trading against a Marceau, because Grozavoy's gun reloads in like 3 to 4 seconds, you do have a bit of a window and an avenue to correct your aim for enemy course changes. That's really all about the gun, really. I mean, Lushun, high DPM, good ballistic, just play it and you'll kind of figure it out. Next thing I wanted to really talk about is Lushun's survivability, right? And this comes in the form of various forms. Personally, I think that even though Lushun has quite a lot of disadvantages, the ship in itself is very survivable, though just survivability is quite overrated, right? Lushun's base hit pool is 24.5k. This is pretty good, a bit higher than average, I would say, for a lot of tier 10 destroyers. And of course, this is helped by the fact that it has the Sevastopol heal, right? And I want to talk a little bit about this heal, because I think that this is a point of contention that a lot of people have with this ship. But in my opinion, I think that Lushun has a very good heal. In the end, regardless of how you look at it, it is better than a traditional DD heal, so you can't really say that the ship is bad because of it, right? But on the flip side, having a heavy repair team consumable will lead a lot of players, and it is a bit of a trap, into thinking their ship is a lot more survivable than it actually is. And this is really just because Lushun's heal gives it a very high amount of potential HP, but it is in the end still potential HP. And another thing is that with the heal, because of how saturation heal mechanics work, your heal will become exponentially worse after every charge, and you're going to be healing a lot less. And this is going to be one of the reasons I talk about basically not running Superintendent on the ship, because it's not worth it. But essentially, you can't really overestimate your heal. Lushun is very different from Lushunny's heal when you consider that Lushunny is going to be supplementing its poor DPM within a DD trade solely through the factor of just out-tanking its opponent by healing an incredible amount of HP in a very short amount of time. While Lushun is going to be more so using its DPM to win the engagement, retreat, and then heal back up to a substantial amount of HP when it is in a safe spot, right? There are very different approaches to using its heal, and one real thing I'll just say about it is that you can't overestimate it. It is better than a regular DD heal, but it is not something that you should overestimate because it's going to get you killed, right? Next thing I'll really talk about when it comes to survivability is that Lushunny is, well, not Lushunny, but Lushun is a rather small destroyer, right? And you can kind of see here that Lushun doesn't sit very high above the water compared to some destroyers like Darien Harland, which even though they are compact, they sit rather high and are easier to hit, especially from ships with poor vertical dispersion. With Lushun also, it's rather scant when it comes to superstructure. Again, ships like Darien Harland have big and tall superstructures. Lushun is rather scarce when it comes to superstructure, and a lot of these, for example, torpedo mounts and also anti-aircraft mounts, don't actually count towards its superstructure hitbox, which is very nice. So overall, Lushun's survivability, pretty good. One thing I will say though is that Lushun, the real kicker and the real thing I think that really kills Lushun's survivability in a lot of situations isn't really the hit pool or the consumables, but more so ship speed. I did go over this when I talked about the cons and pros, but Lushun has 37.8 knot speed. There are a lot of cruisers that can go faster than this. You're basically barely faster than a Napoleon, right? So biggest disadvantage of this whole ship, I would say, is you can kind of imagine what would happen when you're facing a Venezia in a DD that has no smoke, no engine boost, and you only go as fast as a Napoleon, right? In that case, you really have to play very carefully when there is a Venezia or something like a Nevsky, Moskva playing around on your flank, because even though these ships can grief all destroyers per se, Lushun gets turbo grief. Right, and there's a pretty big difference in the case that you almost cannot do anything if one of those cruisers has a hard-on for you. And that is really what I think is the biggest drawback for the ship. Its speed is a very limiting factor, not only in repositioning itself, but also in direct contribution to its tankiness. So just to finish off, I'm not going to talk about AA or whatnot because, I mean, DD AA is kind of irrelevant. It's really just, can you shoot down fighters? If yes, that's good enough, right? I'm going to talk a bit about my captain build. You can see here I'm not running a 21-point captain, but if I was, I would be running BFT, right? And I'm going to kind of justify all of my captain choices after playtesting the ship a little bit. This is probably the best build I've come up with. Incoming fire alert, I really will just use because I really like it personally when I can tell exactly when an enemy ship has fired upon me, because this gives me a bit of mental breathing room to calculate how much time I have to perform a dodge in response to a salvo, right? So I will use incoming fire alert above priority target or preventative maintenance. Personally, I think this is like mandatory for me, but a lot of people will tend to use preventative maintenance instead, and that's a fine pick, I would say. Next thing is kind of self-explanatory. You want to be using Last Stand, because if you're not using it, you're stuck in the water and you can't disengage. Lushun is as good as dead. Next thing, you want to be using Survivability Expert. This isn't really a DD like Shima, that where if you're crazy, you can get away with not running SE. You really do need this SE on Lushun because you're going to be open water gunboating all the time, and your SE is actually improved as well. Having a higher hit pool is also going to be exacerbated by the fact that you have a heal. So that will also correlate to give you that extra step up in HP. Concealment is a no-brainer. You want to have 5.8 concealment. Fearless Brawler is also a no-brainer in the case that Lushun literally does not have a smoke, and in 85% of situations you're going to be spotted when you're shooting. AFT, I did already say this before, you want to have that 15-kilometer range so that you won't stick away too far, you won't be too far away, but at the same time, if the situation demands, you can draw back and shoot from a safer distance. The main point of contention I see a lot of people have is whether you should run BFT or just like main battery and AA specialist, we used to call it BFT or Adrenaline Rush, right? Personally, I wouldn't run Adrenaline Rush because if you think about it, BFT gives you a flat 10% main battery reload buff, and Adrenaline Rush needs you to be below 50% HP to match that buff. So overall, especially considering that you're going to be playing, as long as you play Lushun rather carefully, and you're going to be healing a lot as well, over the course of a game, BFT is probably going to give you a greater overall buff than AR, so I choose to run that instead of AR. Again, usually for DDs with a heal, you try not to run Adrenaline Rush because it is kind of counterintuitive when you heal because it cuts back your main battery reload, but especially with Lushun because you have such a heavy heal and you need to be below 50% HP for it to work anyway, I would choose to run BFT instead of Adrenaline Rush. So that's all really for Lushun. Hope you did enjoy this little new format I'm trying out. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, feel free to dump them in your comments, and I will see you soon.